Good afternoon. That was the song We Are the World. We Are the World was the song that was created for helping Africa. But I think, as we have heard from earlier presentations, the world needs us and we need the world. So hence the theme song of We Are the World. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this very important event. And as Asta mentioned, I would like to start by quoting Charles Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, and it was the winter of despair. This dichotomy is also starkly seen in the world of sustainable and responsible investing. As Refna mentioned, the world of responsible investing has never been so strong. On the chart that she showed, there are now more than 2,500 PRI signatories with over $90 trillion in assets under management. This includes more than 500 of the world's leading pension funds and insurance companies, known as asset owners, who sit on top of the investment chain with huge influence. According to Morningstar, there are now in excess of over 2,300 sustainable funds in the marketplace. And European ESG funds now hold nearly 700 billion euros in assets under management, which is up nearly 60% from 2018. And yet, most climate, environmental, and social indicators are moving in the wrong direction. We heard, and I'm very grateful to the previous presenters on climate change, we heard that climate change continues to impact the world at large. We work at DWS with many different climate scientists, and they are predicting at this particular point in time, based on where the world is today, that by the end of this century, i.e. in the next 80 years, we will see 3.5 to 5 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels. That means that for hundreds of millions of people, the planet will become uninhabitable. And yet, we are still only talking about reducing emissions when much more urgent action is required. Moreover, a very wide range of social and environmental problems continue to plague us, including modern slavery, corruption, poor air quality, and all kinds of inequality and discrimination, to name just a few, and I would put gender discrimination on that list as well. These externalities create an opportunity cost on society. For instance, the money spent on cigarettes, alcohol, and cancer treatment could be better spent on education, on cancer prevention and cancer research, on new technology innovations, and other priorities. We at DWS estimate that our world economic growth be 33% higher if these externalities were to be addressed. Lower economic growth affects the financial performance of all asset classes that we invest in on behalf of our clients. And social and environmental issues make our world and our current situation and our future world less livable, less enjoyable, not to mention the irreplaceable loss of biodiversity. Some investors, like us at DWS, are using our influence to make the world more sustainable and encouraging and requiring companies to set quantitative climate and corporate-specific sustainable development goals and linking this to executive pay, because that's when executives start paying attention. For instance, in the recent PRI assessment, which is an annual process, 64% of asset managers with over $50 billion in assets under management received an A or an A+ score on individual corporate engagement. Yet, ISS found that in the first half of 2019, only 48% of US environmental and social shareholder support resolutions at company annual shareholder meetings received over 30% support. Some pension funds and insurance companies are investing in impact investing, particularly in emerging markets, where capital is most needed. But far too little capital is going to entrepreneurs in developing countries to help them get a bank account, to get a loan, to get insurance, or to African farmers, or off-grid solar, or to innovative clean tech investments. As asset managers and asset owners, we are the guardians of the savings and future well-being of current and future individuals and their families. And this is clearly not an acceptable situation. And this is why many of the young people are taking to the streets, like Greta Thunberg, because they're disappointed, they're depressed, they're fearful, because we adults are just not doing enough. And investors face a double responsibility. We have to create investment returns, and we have to integrate sustainability factors into investment decision-making. But we also have to use our influence with investee companies as well as with governments. I suggest that the investment world needs to do more to demonstrate to our clients, to our employees, to our society, that we are an industry that is doing even more to help make the world a better place. And I do have some specific suggestions for Iceland. But before I come to that, I would like to share briefly how DWS is driving climate action and the SDGs through our research, investments, engagements, and advocating. In 2005, we were the first asset manager to publish a report identifying climate change as a megatrend. Fast forward to 2020, and you can find this research on dws.com on our website. But when one of the previous speakers had that orange chart up, and he was speaking about how we were going from current CO2 emissions to net zero emissions by 2040, and Iceland 2050 for the EU. What that really means, and he was talking about winners and losers, but what it really means from an investment point of view, and what it means for you as business owners, there are 3 risks that we identify. We identify transition risk, physical climate risk, and litigation risk. And let me just say a few words about transition risk. There is no doubt that we will go from a high carbon to a low carbon economy. We will have to do this to make the planet habitable for future generations. And I have no doubt that we will achieve this. However, what you need to take away from what I'm saying next is that this will impact every country in the world, every economy in the world, every sector in the economy, and every company. It doesn't matter what you do. Everyone will have to rethink their business models, how that business model is financed, what the supply chain of that business model, how that fits in. This is something that everyone needs to do, and the moment to start was a long time ago. There is a reason why Tesla is trading at a premium to the world's largest car company, VW. It's called transition risk. Tesla has the business model of the future, electric cars, and the market is telling VW, BMW, Daimler-Benz, Ford, General Motors, and all the other car companies in the world that they don't have the business model of the future. And the market is questioning whether these companies will be able to get there. There's a lot of talk about the oil and gas sector. Up till about 4 years ago, oil and gas companies were 11% of the S&P 500. Today, it's 4%. That is transition risk. So if you'd like to know more about this transition risk and how it impacts you, go to our research on that particular topic. All this research comes from the DWS Research Institute, and not only do we try to educate our clients and investee companies on climate risk, but also on the other ESG topics as well. And when it comes to our investments, we invest in green bonds, in the Sustainable Development Goals, in climate technologies, in ESG passive mandates. In our real estate business in Europe, we just set a carbon reduction target of 50% over the next 10 years. And in impact, we have innovative private equity and private debt strategies. For example, off-grid solar in partnership with the United Nations Green Climate Fund for Africa, as well as microfinance. And when it comes to engagement, over the last 6 years, DWS had the strongest track record voting in favor of virtually all US climate-related resolutions. And in terms of public advocacy, we are among the world's leading asset managers. We are the only one who consistently supports the annual letter from investors that calls on governments to strengthen their climate policies. When I was in Iceland last time, 2 years ago, for the launch of Iceland CIV, I told a short story about the power of responsible investing, which I think is still very relevant today. The story takes place in an island country with a relatively homogeneous population. This country has and is going through numerous corporate negative incidents due to the lack of attention to various environmental, social, and corporate governance issues. As part of the response to the scandals, concerns about gender inequality, global environmental issues, a small number of individuals in major pension plans placed a decisive focus on responsible investing. This has led the country to move from almost zero companies focusing on climate disclosure through the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is chaired by Michael Bloomberg and Mark Carney, to now having the most companies reporting in accordance with the TCFD. The country I'm referring to is Iceland. It's not Iceland, sorry, it's Japan. Sorry, it's Japan. I wished it was Iceland. No, it's Japan. The largest pension fund in the world is the Japanese pension fund, GPIF. And they are creating new types of ESG indices, and they're setting very strong requirements for asset managers to engage with companies. Their aim is for asset managers to do even more to encourage and require stronger ESG policies and practices to shift corporate investment to a more sustainable world. And although Iceland is much smaller than Japan, I do have specific suggestions for how you could also punch above your weight. Iceland is to be commended for your carbon neutral 2040 target and for your continuing efforts to export geothermal expertise to other countries. I am originally from the Netherlands, and I understand well how sustainable technologies developed at home can be exported globally. I would therefore recommend that Iceland goes beyond geothermal to become a more recognized role model in the area of sustainable fisheries and sustainable tourism, which are two important pillars of your economy. I would recommend that Iceland builds on its recent green bond issuance and takes a leading role in the nascent blue bond sector, alongside the Seychelles and the Nordic Investment Bank as the world's only blue bond issuers so far. I attended the UN Climate Summit in New York last September, where a group of insurance companies and pension funds, including several from the Nordic countries, launched a net zero asset owner alliance, pledging to use all of their invested capital to help the world shift to the net zero target. We at DWS are playing a leading role in helping to figure out what net zero practically means in different asset classes through several working groups in the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, an association where I was honored to be elected to the board earlier this year. While 8 key Icelandic asset owners and asset managers are PRI signatories, how powerful would it be if every single Icelandic insurance company, pension fund, foundation, asset manager were to commit to the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance? And for all the Icelandic banks to commit to the principles for responsible banking. So I again challenge the founding members of Iceland CIF, what more can you do to lead by example? Iceland's finance minister is already a founding member of the Helsinki Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. But the Icelandic Central Bank, to my knowledge, is not yet a member of the Network for Greening the Financial System. But how powerful would it be if Iceland's financial regulators were to help encourage the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, pilot the use of climate stress testing, and help asset owners address barriers to committing more private equity, more private debt, and climate-focused investing, for example, in developing countries? That is exactly the approach that Denmark and their pension funds are taking. Could Icelandic investors commit further funds to this? Nearly 800 companies worldwide have committed to science-based targets, but this does not yet include any Icelandic companies. In fact, of Iceland's 20 major listed companies, only 2 have any sort of ESG ranking from the major global data providers. And we looked at those scores, and they're not particularly strong. I know that even if you add up all of Iceland's invested capital, banks and companies, it's still relatively small. But any community of asset owners are able to, and in fact have the obligation to be forceful owners to accelerate responsible business and responsible investing. And if Iceland's investment community were to make this commitment in the near future, then this could give Iceland's Prime Minister the ability to issue a challenge to the other European heads of state to do what they can to help facilitate and encourage their country's pension funds and insurance companies to also commit. And this could be particularly powerful because in September, Germany will have the presidency of the European Council and will host a European Heads of State Climate Summit with China. The aim is for Europe and China to strengthen ambition and send a signal to other countries before the COP26 in Glasgow. If most European pension funds and insurance companies committed to net zero and committed to exploring how more impact investings could be made, then perhaps China's pension funds and insurance companies could also commit to this net zero asset owner alliance. This would be an enormously powerful announcement and send a strong signal to governments and companies to strengthen their own policies and targets. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, the flight that first put humans on the moon. A colleague of mine informed me that Iceland has a strong connection with this very historic event. 32 astronauts, including 9 of the 12 who ultimately walked on the moon, visited the small fishing community of Húsavík in northern Iceland, whose landscape apparently looks like the moon. And President Kennedy at the time said, and I will quote him, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." Of the many books written on Apollo 11, one book examined the lessons Apollo has for dealing with complex social, economic, and environmental problems. The author states, and I quote, "If we want to tackle climate change, we can. It can't be solved with a moonshot, in the sense that Apollo was solved with a series of brilliant technical, engineering, and management efforts. But it can be solved with a moonshot, in the sense of rallying people in all countries to a purpose, to a mission, to something that takes incredible effort." The UN Secretary General has said that sustainability is a race we can win and we must win. As a mother of 3 millennial children, and many of you here with children and possibly even grandchildren, we all owe it to the next generation to deliver meaningful impact. I was particularly moved to read last year that Iceland held a glacier funeral following the disappearance of the oak, hope I pronounced that properly, glacier, and the heartfelt op-ed in the New York Times, which my daughter forwarded to me, by the Right Honourable Prime Minister of Iceland. I hope that my speech this afternoon has given you some ideas how Icelandic business, how Icelandic investors could pick up the lessons of the moon landing and contribute to our modern day moonshot of slowing, stopping, and reversing both the climate and the sustainability crisis. Thank you.